So this is the 2300 hours GMT edition of the Khoodeelaar television channel, broadcasting on the internet under the banner of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions. Baby Angel Geronimo is the world's bestest baby angel Geronimo, witnessing the worst behavior by the depraved series of cabals constituting the so-called UK government in the current period. We shall, of course, be commenting on the latest published news in the mainstream in the United Kingdom about Gary Lineker and the BBC. And we emphasize that none of the things that has been said by the Fleet Street newspapers, either on Monday morning or none of the things contained in the front pages being shown on the Sky News press preview, on the none of the newspapers, Fleet Street newspapers, is telling the truth. And the truth is that what Gary Lineker had tweeted about was a reference to the language depraved, cruel, heartless language that she is related to survivors or victims of Nazis. And so, therefore, she can claim that she is entitled to condemn the comparison that Gary Lineker made with her language and the Nazis' language in the 1930s. Gary Lineker didn't say anything about the 1940s. Technically speaking, it was the 1940s when what the Nazis were preparing to do in the 1930s were implemented, carried out by their staging the Holocaust, the massacres, the genocides during the 1940s. 3-4 years, but that was enough to exterminate the people that they targeted. And what Joan Salter said in her piece in The Guardian, 17th of January 2023, the shocking thing was in Germany and under the Nazis that they were brainwashing ordinary people to dehumanize their neighbor, ordinary people. And then they were committing atrocities against their ordinary people, neighbors, and returning home to their families as if they hadn't done anything wrong. So, what Gary Lineker said should have been followed by the BBC in mitigating the claim that John Salter had made, and also Gary Lineker then followed up 6 weeks later. What John Salter had challenged Suella Crueller Fernandez, within course Braverman, That was what John Salter had challenged Braverman about. So compared to what John Salter had face to face, in Sussex, I think. It was only a part of that Gary Lineker actually reproduced in his very moderately worded tweet. The BBC didn't investigate, nor indeed did Sky News or ITV or Channel 4 News, nor indeed did any of the print titles in Fleet Street, all of which, in terms of news, breaking news relevance, were absolutely given a ready-made, very urgent emergency kind of topic to investigate. But they all failed. Or they failed and they chose to fail, which raises the question about the role of the so-called National Union of Journalists and their very craftily in place secretary, Michelle, a woman called Michelle Stanistrad. Now, Stanistrad, let's check her name because I don't want to get this name of this individual wrong. Michelle is the first name. I haven't got that wrong. But there is a need to check second name. Stanistrad. Michelle Stanistrad. And Michelle Stanistrad is as useless and as corrupt and as ignorant and as ill-read as she could be. Because in the years that she has been in this place, in this post, far too many serious events have taken place concerning the duties of journalists in terms of internal domestic events in the United Kingdom as well as internationally. And the journalists, this is the National Union of Journalists, have failed. The British journalists have completely failed, absolutely failed, to tell the truth to their readers, their viewers, their listeners. And Stanistrad, if you look at her image, she looks like a doll. So she's a doll on display. She hasn't got any substance. She has got no intellect. And she has no morality. And if you go back to the role played by the NUJ, probably when Michelle Stanistrad was an infant in the 1980s, when the Americans were at that stage maneuvering to keep control of the energy supplies from the Gulf, Arabian Gulf. You see that the NUJ didn't investigate. And it goes on. Just an example about the lack of substance in the British media. And Imran Khan in Pakistan make a note. It's not just the judiciary. It is not just the police. It is not just the so-called Crown Prosecution Service. It is not just the member of parliament or members of parliament or the houses of parliament or the House of Commons. that are completely disengaged from the reality, the evidence, the substance, the morality. The newspapers and the equivalent counterparts, radio and television are totally in voluntary denial of the truth. So we shall talk more about this in the later parts of this edition because of the so-called agreement reached between Gary Lineker and the BBC. All the headlines, all the focus on this so-called agreement remains on Gary Lineker and the BBC, not on what the Nazis did and what Suella Crueller Eviller Braverman has been doing. If we flash back 2 years ago, when ugly Priti Patel was in the post that Suella evil one is holding now as the Home Secretary incumbent, there were streams and streams and streams of headings and headline news items treating asylum seekers, the boat people, as an army of invaders. And ugly Patel, more than once, more than a dozen times, invoked the powers of the state, powers of the military part of the state, and threatened these people, desperate people in the seas, in the boats, with military attacks by military helicopters, and probably military aircraft. Sink them. Now that was, in comparison, in terms of the comparative periods, like in the 1930s, the German Nazis were preparing the ordinary people, as John Salter said, to hate their neighbors, ordinary neighbors, to the point of murdering them. But they were not murdering them yet. They started murdering them when the Holocaust was brought into being in the 1940s. Priti Patel was actually threatening to sink and murder these desperate people fleeing in the oceans. So this is not something that Gary Lineker has started, or indeed John Salter has started. This is something that has been ongoing for as long as the conservatives have had any power. Let's flash back to January 1978. And there was a television documentary slot every Monday on the ITV networks. I think it was called World in Action. And that was the year, 1978 was the year before Thatcher was allowed by the racist Labour Party fronted James Callaghan to become the Prime Minister. So it was January 1978 when Margaret Thatcher, UK Conservative leader, raring to go, that is to say, she was madly impatient to get into number 10 Downing Street, which she got in just over a year after that. So let's check what she was saying. I said so far what I've said from memory, but let's get the facts checked. It was World in Action. So it was actually carried by the Granada, made by the Granada television, part of the ITV networks. And this is what is dated the 27th of January 1978. Okay, so let's see what they. So this is 1978, 27th of January. Margaret Thatcher. TV interview for Granada World in Action. Rather swamped. That was the key word, swamped. Now, what Joan Salter accused, factually accused correctly, Evil Suella Braverman of using was she said that the refugees constituted an invasion. Now, Margaret Thatcher said, let's get to the actual sentence which she mouthed. Remember what this is coming from? This is coming from Priti Patel using the military language and rhetoric and phrase. Now, this says that the text of that interview was embargoed until broadcast at 2030 on 30th of January 1978. A BBC transcript of Margaret Thatcher's remark about British people fearing they might be rather swamped by people of different culture varies slightly from the Granada transcript, which was rather swamped by people with a different culture. Editor's italics. The printed press follows the Granada version, but they will have been relying on the Granada transcript. The interview was set up to mark the third anniversary of Margaret Thatcher's election as leader of the Conservative Party. And there were, in the transcript, 3,821 words. And let's go forward in the Conservative Party organization, that the themes covered in the interview, the Conservative Party as an organization, employment, industry, general elections, monetary policy, privatized and state industries, pay, housing, law and order, Northern Ireland, race, immigration, nationality, religion and morality, trade unions, and famous statements by Margaret Thatcher. So what she said is quoted in the she said, look, let us try and start with a few figures as far as we know them. And I'm the first to admit it is not easy to get clear figures from the Home Office about immigration. But there was a committee which looked at it and said that if we went on as we are, then by the end of the century, there would be 4 million people of the new Commonwealth or Pakistan here. Notice the singling out of Pakistan. Now, that is an awful lot, and I think it means that people are really rather afraid that this country might be rather swamped by people with a different culture. And you know, the British character has done so much for democracy, for law, and done so much throughout the world that if there is any fear that it might be swamped, people are going to react and be rather hostile to those coming in. Now, remember the word hostile? That was 1978. 88 is 10 years, 98 is 20 years. 2008 is 30 years. More than 30 years later, that very word, hostile, who is that? Hold on. Sorry, who is that?
Mate, TV noise, mate.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was not aware. I'll
No,
ring.
enough noise.
Okay.
Okay. Good night.
So somebody from the next door wants the noise to be kept down. So I'm going to keep the noise down. So when Theresa May became the Home Secretary after the Conservatives were given the election in May 2010, she introduced the hostile environment. Let's go to the hostile environment by Theresa May. Okay, so she actually got, this is the entry on hostile environment. It was in May 2012. The then Home Secretary, Theresa May, said in a Daily Telegraph interview, the aim is to create here in Britain a really hostile environment for illegal migration, What we don't want is a situation where people think that they can come here and overstay because they're able to access everything they need. Okay, so we'll go to the so the explainer is the hostile environment is a set of measures, both administrative and legislative, to make life so miserable for anyone called Byzantine in the Court of Appeal. And the Home Office has a tendency to appeal decisions, then delay the appeal process unnecessarily. And there is even a history of non-compliance with orders of the courts. After the resignation of the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd followed the Windrush scandal. In April 2018, her successor, Home Secretary Sajid Javid, attempted to rename the hostile environment to the compliant environment. However, the same issues have continued to exist. Nothing has changed. So it's a cruel, paranoid failing inside the Home Office, the long read by Daniel Trilling. Something is badly wrong at the heart of one of Britain's most important ministries. How did it become so broken? And then this question is how why is this relevant to EU citizens? Now that was in this piece was written before the Brexit. So EU citizens were very much part of the population of migrants in the UK. So it's so after the settled status deadline of 30th of June 2021, any EU citizen, or rather their non-EU family member, who has not applied for pre-settled or settled status will face the full force of the hostile environment. So and there is the Windrush scandal. So what we can say is that whatever the agreement between the BBC and Gary Lineker, and whatever he 2012, when Theresa May introduced the hostile environment and the measures contained in the hostile environment policy were absolutely identical to the policy practiced by the Nazis in the 1930s Germany. Gary Lineker didn't say that, but that is what the documents show, that is what the records show, if anyone wants to check that. Okay. What we shall be doing, we shall be moving on to looking at the front pages of the paper Tuesday. So instead of talking about the actual similarities between the hostile environment introduced by Theresa May in 2012 and the Nazis' practices in the 1930s, targeting especially the Jews who were deprived of all the access to amenities, having driver's license and other things. The British newspapers on Tuesday are running, like the Express, they're running stories about the future of the BBC license fee. It is a million miles away from what Gary Lineker was trying to draw attention to. And what has happened is that this is the kind of tendency of covering up the truth by the newspapers and creating a diversion away from the real issues of denial of human rights and deprivation of human rights and the violation of the United Kingdom's obligations under the various international treaties. Let's look at the international treaty called the Refugee Convention. So this is the 1951 Refugee Convention, and so there are 37 articles in the Refugee Convention, and then the final act, which is there are 268 pages, about 300 pages in the convention. Okay, so this is a convention. The text is running 1951. So this convention is being totally denied by the United Kingdom, which is a signatory to the convention. Let's check the UK status. Now, here is the government website, which is www.gov.uk, and it says literally that UK Treaty Organization, UK Treaty website, the Treaty Enquiry Service now, UK contains the details of around 15,000 treaties involving the United Kingdom. And I can tell you the treaties are national. So what the Gary Lineker tweet and the Joan Salter questions put to or any time under the Nazi war, treaties didn't exist in the way that they are in existence now. For example, the 1951 treaties for refugees would not have been imaginable in the 1930s. So the obligations parts of treaty signatory states, like the United Kingdom, are 1,000 times more transparent and clear and detailed. So if the obligations are that strong and they're violated, then the violation is condemnable to that power of 1,000 times. So the newspapers, the media, and the commentators are not talking about any of this. In the papers, in the television programs, or in the radio programs. So what we shall be doing is putting this particular edition to an end, and we shall consider the contents of the next edition, next part. This is being ended at 23:44 hours. This is part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, broadcasting under the Baby Angel Geronimo editions. And this is now 45 minutes long and ending at 23:44 hours.